I started printmaking after an afternoon of teacher training where we were looking at teaching primary level art, and I started some work with the kids that I work with at school, or I did back then, and it kind of grew and escalated from that.
Today we're with Ben, who's a screen printer. He's recently moved into a Yorkshire art space studio in central Sheffield, and we asked how being part of this large community was helping him.
It's really given me scope to, I suppose, perfect some of what I was doing already. I was able to invest in some new machinery, better machinery, bigger machinery, which is not, bigger is not always better, but certainly it's kind of helped me out. Some of the things I was doing previously was much more small scale because I didn't have the room necessarily for kind of storage for a start, so I'm able to kind of stockpile larger quantities of stock at a time, which makes things like wholesale orders much easier. The order comes in, I can process it straight away and get it out because I've got the stock there, which working from home I just couldn't do that, I just didn't have the space to do that.
Recently Ben had done his first trade fair and we asked him to tell us about it.
There's normally a selection process, so going through that process is actually quite a nice feeling when you get selected for something like that, because it's already you've kind of got the sense that your product fits and it should be quite well received, hopefully. And it's quite a bizarre process. If you've never done a trade show before, which this was my first one last April, it's a very, very bizarre process because it's completely different selling to the public. So it's focused on selling to people that already know or already have a pretty good idea about what they're looking for. And you're there over a number of days, so it might be kind of 3 or 4 days, it depends on which event it is. And a lot of the time people have, like I say, have a very, very good idea already about the product that they're looking for, or the style of whatever it is. So if they know they're looking for print, they might have a very clear idea about what type of print they're looking for, or the style that they're looking for. Compared to a regular kind of public selling event, it's very, very interactive. A public selling event is very interactive. You're constantly talking to people that are constantly interested in what you're doing. Even if they're not there to necessarily buy the product, they might be a consumer later on, and you kind of have to take that into account. A trade show is, you can go for a few hours without talking to anyone at all. If you're only getting galleries looking for jewellery and you create print, it's a long stint, and it can be, you can kind of get quite almost kind of worried about what's going on and worried about, am I going to get anything back from this? But kind of doing that process, you've learned that actually sticking with it and kind of seeing it through to the end almost. There will always be a couple of galleries or a couple of shops, and you only really need a couple to kind of make that process worthwhile. It's an expensive process, much more so than a regular public selling event would be. But you only really need a few, and if you kind of start the event off and it doesn't always kind of go to plan, and you've got, the first day you don't speak to many people at all, or there's not much interest, kind of don't get downhearted about it. By the end of it, there'll be something, there'll be a lead somewhere, or you've packed somebody that 6 months down the line, they're going to get back in touch with you and place that order. It's not as immediate, and it's not as kind of straight away as a public selling event would be. And that was the biggest thing I learned from it.
Ben doesn't sell his products via his website. He sells mostly wholesale to retailers.
I've had a couple of wholesale orders that came from a distributor that I work with in Harrogate called the Great British Exchange. One of those was an international order, which was rather exciting, which went to a dedicated penguin shop in the Falkland Islands. And there's something quite nice about selling on an international level, and particularly that order, that process of that order, because it was an order that came from kind of 5 different individuals, which I was one of them. And at the time I had no idea where it was going, but kind of found out eventually that it was going to the Falkland Islands, and it's kind of a big deal. It's a long trek for products to go, and it's quite exciting. That's actually my second international order. So I did work with a company in France who put together travel subscription boxes, and I sent them 50 small kind of keychain purses, headphone wallets. I had an email out of the blue from this guy, and He was really, really complimentary, and I was kind of unsure how we'd found out about the product because it's not in any trade packs. It's not something I would normally do at a trade level. So we got into this conversation and he started to talk about how part of the process of that subscription box was that he would make a journey over to the country that subscription box is for. He'd look at sourcing products, and normally they're from kind of not necessarily independent makers, but small companies. He's not looking at huge companies. But he actually said he was in a pub in London, because it was the London box, and he sat down next to this lovely girl from up north, and started talking to her, and she showed him one of these products. It was a headphone wallet that was on her keys, and he started to ask her about where she'd bought it. And I've never been fortunate enough to find this girl and say thank you to her, because it actually led to a really exciting and potentially much bigger order in the future.
Part of selling wholesale is working with buyers, and we wanted to hear Ben's thoughts on the subject.
You're kind of assuming that they want your product, and you're assuming that you'd be suitable, and a lot of the time you might think that that's the case, but actually what your idea is about your product and what somebody else sees your product as being, it can be two different things, or maybe actually they're ready to take a change in direction. So while my product might fit with a certain shop or gallery, currently that they're going to take a new direction in a new season. So it can be quite tricky. So I think it's kind of the reverse almost of doing a trade fair. A trade fair is you standing there and saying, this is me, come and speak to me if you're interested in my product. Approaching somebody is kind of the opposite of that, saying, here's my product, I think it'll be suitable, and actually maybe a lot of the time it wouldn't be, but you kind of have to do that as well. You know, you have to put yourself out there and you have to put that product forward, and maybe it pays off. Yeah.
To finish up, we asked Ben where he wanted to be in a year's time.
So I know in terms of my calendar this year and the events that I've done, I definitely want to be doing more of the ones that worked well, axing some of the ones that perhaps didn't do so well, and just using my time more effectively. I am probably guilty of not always making the most of the time that I've got, with a view, I suppose, to do it. I don't want to say doing it on a more permanent basis, on a kind of taking a bigger chunk of my week, because I'm still working part-time as well. And I do very much enjoy doing the two. I think a year's time would be optimistic, but maybe sometime in the future, looking at doing it on a more full-time basis.